Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture Albion Never Dies. In this episode, I'm reviewing No Time to Die. It's been 2 years since it came out, so I thought that's about the right length of time for me to give out my first impressions. When it first came out, I did carry a couple of interviews with other people, Jocelyn Sy at Ladies Who Bond, Chris Morales at That One Bond Guy, and of course Donnie Waldron at Quantum of History. I interviewed them to find out their opinions, but I never shared my own review of the film. Indeed, I haven't done any film reviews on this podcast. When I first started up, quite a few people were asking if I would go through the Bond films one by one, and I really felt that wasn't the kind of thing that I was best at contributing. I felt I had other areas where I could contribute, but after, 140 odd, almost 150 episodes, hopefully you're used to me by now. So if this film review is a little bit unconventional, hopefully you'll find that interesting rather than disappointing. It will be very much my own personal take. And I'll say first up, this is not a film that I hate, and I know that many people do. It's also probably not my favourite Daniel Craig film, let alone my favourite Bond film. Upper middle is where it's currently sitting, and I did release a podcast ranking the Bond films, and I had it fairly in the upper middle. So you have that spoiler already, the spoiler for my opinion. But I thought I'd go through, first of all, let's say my journey with this film from the earliest reports I saw until now, and talk about some of the issues raised, because there's been a lot of media discussion about different aspects of this film all throughout, production and subsequent release. And then I'll go through the film itself, location by location. I'll break it up that way. So I hope you enjoy all three bits of this, but starting out with my own personal perspective. The build-up. Well, first thing I became aware of it was browsing the most serious newspaper, the Daily Mail online. It was one of the few newspapers that just wasn't blocked in China. I was living in China at the time. I was managing education teams, education centres and so on, adult education centres, in case you're wondering. And it was a very full-on job. In China, you work a lot. And so I had a great deal on my mind, but it was lovely just to, switch on to the Daily Mail, find out who's going to bed with who, and who's outraged at what, and see on-set paparazzi photos of Daniel Craig looking very glamorous as he potters about the Caribbean. Looked great. I remember seeing him in a particular pair of sunglasses that caught my eye. I was kind of collecting sunglasses at that time because, I was working in the tropics, very strong sun, I had blue eyes, got to protect them, and blue eyes being more susceptible to certain issues such as cataracts if you don't wear very good sunglasses in such strong sunlight regions. So I was collecting sunglasses, saw a pair, and I think that pair of Varney Legend 06 sunglasses was one of the first kind of pieces of James Bond lifestyle that I got. That and the shorts from Skyfall, the swimming shorts. So I got those two things together, and as I followed it all throughout production, and it was mainly the casual clothes, I thought were interesting, occasionally showing my tailor things, and she might make, for example, a blue linen jacket or a black silk shirt. My clothes were very much, work clothes, and that's kind of it. Maybe some exercise things. And then the song came out, which I quite enjoyed. I thought it was quite a nice song. I used to listen to that on my way to work. And then ended up leaving that job, leaving China to America, had a bit of downtime. And that's when this film came out, and I managed to see an early release screening. And at this point, I was looking at on-set photos, and I saw Bond had this house that was full of books. So I was collecting the books and reading them. I put those reviews on YouTube. I was just really enjoying it. So, he has some rum, I drink the rum. He has some fish. I got the fish, I cooked the fish. It was very nice. And like I said, I eventually got this early release screening in America. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was everything I like, right? So I am a fan of the literary Bond. Most of the movies really just take a couple of the books for their kind of tone of who is James Bond. They don't take so much the earlier books, where Fleming himself is still trying to work out who the character is. They don't really take the later books, when Bond is, frankly, a bit battered. They very much take him at the height of his powers, and that's very much the Sean Connery interpretation. But I tend towards the later version of him. I found it much more interesting, and this film kind of took that. So I enjoyed it, and I'd taken a break from social media. I didn't want any spoilers. I honestly didn't want other people's take, because that can colour your own. I saw it, loved it, and then I switched on my social media and saw that there were some very, very different perspectives on this film from my own. People who felt that Bond just wasn't Bond, and taking issues with some of those kind of sticking points that had been in the media beforehand. I was very surprised. In my recent interview with Donald Waldron, say Quantum of History, he talked about how maybe for a lot of people it was just the wrong time. They weren't having downtime at this point. I said I'd stopped that career, was looking for a new career. I had a bit of downtime. And it's hit me at a kind of a good point. But a lot of people, they had enough going on in their lives. It was dark enough. It was a dark film, and just didn't hit well. Maybe time will lend perspective. Really lends perspective. That's what Bond says in Skyfall. We shall see whether that's the case or not. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, famously, was not well received at the time. We shall see. We shall see. And then, last couple of years, I've been keeping in touch with people and seeing what they think. But I have to say that gets really down to, was Bond Bond-like? Is this a Bond-like Bond film? Some people say it's a great film but not a great Bond film, which they say about quite a few of the Daniel Craig films. Like I say, I really like Bond as a human character. Not a superhuman, not a superhero. I like him, for example, in From Russia with Love, where he's full of self-doubt. I like him in The Man with the Golden Gun, where he has his flaws. I like him in the Timothy Dalton era, where he hates his job. You know, if he sacks me, I'll thank him for it. But he knows that he's good at it, and he's not a sadistic killer, he's an efficient killer, and he knows the difference. I like him in that zone, and I feel this got that right. But as I say, for a lot of people, it's not just the Connery Bond, but let's say the Connery in Goldfinger, not From Russia with Love, and not You Only Live Twice. And that really gets into who is Bond and who is Connery's Bond, because are there 6 James Bonds, one for each actor? 7 if you include the literary Bond, or are there 25 Bonds? Because the Bond actors can give really different performances. It's one thing I like about Roger Moore. His 7 Bond films have very, very different performances. I think him in Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun is actually very, very different from him in For Your Eyes Only, which is a performance I really enjoy as an older Bond, kind of looking back and advising somebody against revenge. Of course, Bond himself, you could say he's based on various World War II veterans. Ian Fleming came across a fair few. He worked in naval intelligence, knew a fair few people. Of course, his distant cousin, I think, was Christopher Lee, who was in the Special Operations Executive. And I sometimes think, the way he wrote his original novels, it's as if the Special Operations Executive had just carried on and on and on. And Ben McIntyre's kind of biography of Bond and Fleming really takes the angle that it is kind of the SOE as if it carried on past the war, with most of the details just grabbed from Fleming's life. His soap, his tailor, his everything is really just kind of used as filler detail for Bond's life. I find that interesting, and that's kind of more my image of Bond. Could take Bond as a mythic hero, and if you do so, then these days you think mythology, right? It's Joseph Campbell. He's the one guy, he dominates it since the 70s, and especially since the release of Star Wars, George Lucas really popularising the hero's journey as it becomes the go-to for everything. And the triumph at the end seems to be an essential part of that, which is interesting. In English mythology, you have, King Arthur. One of the go-tos would be Le Mort to Arthur. It's right in the title, he dies. Or, of course, the myth of Drake's drum. Again, he dies. There are, of course, alternatives. You've got, the master's journey, so he becomes a hero and then he becomes a master and so on. But Joseph Campbell has been seen as very much the model of mythology, but there are other ones apart from the hero's journey. You do have the classic Saint George, and I think it's Vladimir Prop, the Russian academic, who looked at the chaos cycle. You've got equilibrium, disequilibrium, and equilibrium. I talked to Roland Hume about about book structures and the advantages of them and the disadvantages of them. I quite like this kind of George slaying the dragon thing, because at the beginning you have a kind of a bad equilibrium. Everyone, they used to have happy days, but now the dragon has come in and he's terrorising them all. We thought everything was okay, but it wasn't. Secretly there was always that danger, and it's come in, it's thrown our lives and out of kilter, and then you get George slaying the dragon, and now everything's back to happy days again, without the dragon lurking in the background. Bond generally fits, I think, into that category, that he is, he's a G-man, he's a government man, because he stands for stability and law and order. And then we have a villain comes in who threatens to disrupt the global order. Bond knocks him off, and then we're back to the global order again. Like I say, I like it when that's very much front and centre. So the pre-titles, we might see the villain's actions. And From Russia with Love, we start off with Red Grant as the threat. Then we get kind of Bond's adventure, and then we get the equilibrium again. The man with the golden gun, we've got the Bond villain right at the beginning. Killing, because that's what bad people do. And apart from James Bond, obviously, but he will slay the dragon in a kind of lair, which I quite like. Live and Let Die again. We've got the murderous villains at the beginning. Oh yeah, we've got Dr. No, murderous villains at the beginning, and Tomorrow Never Dies, my favourite one for this story structure, because we have the Royal Navy being attacked, and we show Bond kind of putting on his Royal Navy uniform, walking across the Air Force Base. He works closely with the Royal Navy, and it's the Royal Navy who destroys the villain's lair. So yeah, there we have a very specific kind of almost revenge, justice, or at the very least equilibrium, disequilibrium, equilibrium again. So I like Bond as a kind of a mythic hero. And of course, if it's mythology, then you need certain archetypes, right? So you need not just the great, shiny knight. You also need a princess to be rescued. You need the dispatcher, the man who says you need to go on an adventure. Well, that would be M. You need the donor, take this special sword, or this water PPK, or some weapon with a bit of mythology, your father's lightsaber. You need some kind of comedy sidekick. Yeah, the older Bond films have that more. And then maybe some kind of guide, especially a local guide. All these kind of mythological archetypes are really present in the Bond films. So, who is James Bond? I'd say he's kind of a St. George mythic character. Not necessarily a hero's journey kind of mythic character, but that is something they've added in, especially with Casino Royale, giving him some kind of origin story, which of course in the books wasn't there. So I might have said this on another podcast, but the first time I saw Casino Royale, I was quite disappointed, because I was very much in favour of Pierce Brosnan, and I thought this would have been a great sunset movie for Pierce Brosnan. I think, if you add in an origin story, you can equally add in an exit story, and I think it would have been a great final film for him. But what about those endings? The ending of this movie, No Time to Die, and this is obviously a full spoiler review. A lot of people do not like the ending, which I find interesting. Should he just go into the sunset and be happy, like in the old films? They kind of tried that with Daniel Craig in Spectre, and it fell very, very flat. People didn't find it quite so cool, and there he was in a classic suit, and there he was in his classic car, and he's got the beautiful girl, and he's driving away, and it's very classic, but it did just really fall flat. Could you have him resign from the service? Well, he kind of typed up his resignation letter in Casino Royale, and it's been done. It's been done, all I'm saying. Could you have him, okay, he was retired and now he's come back to the service and he's, punching again? Well, we have Quantum of Solace, he never left. And Skyfall, where it's, back to basics. We've already had it. He's done all those different things. Not to say there's nothing against him doing it again, but we've seen it all before, and from the same guy. And an ambiguous ending, could we have him, he looks like he's died, but maybe he doesn't, and some people have said the Dark Knight Rises ending, but again, we've seen it in the Dark Knight Rises, and it is a creative endeavour, filmmaking. I'm always happy to see them do something a bit different, a bit creative, and that's the concept of genre, right, that people go because they want something like The Last Thing, but a little bit different. So what little bit different could they have? Well, they went for something that was quite different, and that seems very controversial for myself. Not so controversial because while this era has been the death of superheroes, I feel I've seen it. Right? I feel I've seen it. We're pretty well every major franchise character I can think of. So for me, there's a point where he starts to climb the ladder, and I'm like, yep, cool. Same. Maybe not cool wasn't what I was thinking, but I was like, yeah, there's only one way this is going, because we've seen it. And he goes out unflinchingly in a blaze of glory for the greater good, both the world and his families. Okay. This is Bond as a trend follower, just like in Moonraker. Cool, Star Wars has been big. Previous Bond films said we're doing For Your Eyes Only next. Nope, they changed it to Moonraker because space is the thing. And it was a huge juggernaut of a movie. Much as it might be derided now, it was massive. It worked for them. Equally, Live and Let Die, lots of people talk about that film and how it kind of followed American trends. Quantum of Solace, again, it gets talked about. Lots of people dislike how it followed some of the filmography of the Bourne Identity and so on. I don't feel it leaned too much into the story, because the Bourne Identity is very anti-authoritarian. It's, those in authority are not to be trusted. That's not really the message of Bond. So it takes out that message, but had some of the style. And Quantum of Solace is a very stylish film. I actually really like it. And it's probably the most recent film that really got me into being a fan, because it prompted me to read the books. And I really like that. Anyway, we've seen Bond as a trend follower, and this is one that just followed a trend, really, and I'm alright with that. But that's been one of the biggest controversies about this film. Probably the second biggest controversy of the film is that he is not 007 for a large part of this film. We have Agent Numi as 007, and this was much discussed in the media. It's been talked about, I'd say not so much in the fandom, but it has been, well, it has been a controversy. Now, if I had a penny for every time a James Bond actor's final film had a strong black woman as an antagonist, then ally, in his final movie, I have about 3 pennies. Now, that's not very much, but it is more than I would expect for such a specific plot scenario. So, obviously, Roger Moore's last Bond film was A View to a Kill. Everyone knew it would be his last one. And there we have a strong black lady. She is absolutely an antagonist at the beginning, and then absolutely an ally at the end. Mayday, played by Grace Jones. She was a real star in her own right, an international star. And it's funny because interviews at the time with Grace Jones said that she was in the makeup chair, they started to do some red eyeliner, and she was like, not too much, because she's trying to fit in with them, and the director John Glenn came in and was like, oh, you should do way more than that, because you hire Grace Jones, you get Grace Jones, and encouraged her to be as much herself as possible. As I say, she was a real star, and I think adds a lot to that film. So I think that's fantastic. Then we have Pierce Brosnan. We didn't know it was his last Bond film. It's just interesting, they cast Halle Berry as a strong black lady. Okay, not so antagonistic at the beginning, but there's a bit of antagonism then, later on, maybe middle of the film, then obviously becomes his ally, but there is a bit of back and forth of who is this? She has to say, hang on, we're on the same side here, And of course Halle Berry actually won an acting Oscar, Academy Award, partway through the filming of Die Another Day. Again, hugely successful film at the time, highest grossing film ever, even adjusting for inflation and ticket prices and so on. Brosnan films only went from strength to strength at the box office. Even though looking back, many people would put them kind of in the other order. GoldenEye is a favourite. I did a poll on my Instagram and on my YouTube channel ranking the Brosnan films, and I found it interesting. People put them in release order. Most people voted for GoldenEye as their favourite, Tomorrow Never Dies second favourite, The World Is Not Enough, and then Die Another Day was seen as the weakest. But for box office returns, it was completely the other way around. He got stronger and stronger at the box office. Then finally for Craig we have, strong black lady antagonist, then ally in his final film. The actress I'm not so familiar with. I saw her in Captain Marvel as one of the supporting actresses, but to be honest, she didn't really stir my mind. So when this was coming out, I thought, well, it's another Mayday, or it's another Jinx from Die Another Day. To be honest, I found her quite forgettable, and lots of people have said, well, that's the writing. Think of any number of really successful actors, Arnold Schwarzenegger. I wouldn't say he's had the best lines ever, but he's always made them the best thing ever. No such thing as small roles, right? Only small actors. Well, it can be a combination, but I just think if you wanted really good writing, for myself, I would have loved to see Naomi Harris as Eve Moneypenny. basically playing the same role, right? So she can use her personal connection with Bond, established very much in Skyfall and Spectre, to bring Bond back out of retirement. We'd see the actress's real-life Jamaican connections, and I think it could have leaned into the location a lot more. We could have returned her to the field, picking up her Skyfall arc. Maybe not everyone's suitable for the field, but maybe those 5 years that pass, or more actually, between Skyfall and No Time to Die. We could have seen something come out of that, and I really like that, and she's already a fan favourite. Lots and lots of fans love Naomi Harris, so I think that would have been a really good one to see Moneypenny back in the field. And of course, Bond towards the end has to entrust the girl and the little girl to his other agent, and I think that would have made so much of those personal connections. So I think it's a shame to introduce a brand new character right at the end to play that role. But ultimately, as I say, I found this a very forgettable role for all the media furore, and if there hadn't been that media furore, I probably wouldn't be mentioning it right now. Finally, the biggest spoiler of the film, Bond as a father. Again, quite a few people said they didn't want to see that, but it's part of life, and I think that's really interesting. Fleming, had a child partway through writing the films. Partway through writing the book series, and the idea of Bond having a child is not new to the continuation novels. A few people refer to one of the John Gardner spin-off novels, but actually Fleming has this right at the end. Full spoiler, right at the end of You Only Live Twice, the novel, there is reference to a child. So I didn't find that so new, and I thought that was actually really, really interesting. And I must admit, when I first read that book, You Only Live Twice, it's a very, very, very dark book. I mean, darker, I would say, a lot darker than No Time to Die. And if you don't like to see Bond at a low in this film, you probably won't enjoy the book, because it's very much a study of heartbreak. And I find it really engrossing and really powerful. Now, when I first read it, I thought, well, Fleming, ultimately died of heart failure. He drank heavily, he smoked heavily, he ate a lot of butter, as we know from his own recipes. So his health was failing, and I often wondered if that was really the darkness within him. But the same year that he came out with You Only Live Twice, he came out with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, his children's book, really written for his child. And it is funny that You Only Live Twice and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang were both Fleming books adapted to the screen by Roald Dahl. I feel there's a really strong connection there. But I'd say that you could carry on the question, with adopted fathers and actual fathers and so on. You could look at Fleming's own life. You could also look at Michael G. Wilson's life as the stepson of Cubby Broccoli. That little nugget was given to me by A.G. Chowdhury, who asked me to think about that when looking at Spectre. I find that really interesting. Fleming, was partly looked after. Oh, where's that book? Yeah, I've got it here, The Life of Ian Fleming by John Pearson. It refers to, the family that took Fleming in after his father's death for a short time. And then, of course, A.G. Chowdhury's book with Matthew Field, Some Kind of Hero. I thought that was really interesting. I don't have any problem with Bond having family relationships, but again, that could be my personal take. I spent 7 years living in Turkish Cyprus. I speak Turkish. I do like a good Turkish film. And any Turkish film has a range of family relationships, right? So people sometimes say, oh, could you have a insert generic description James Bond, right? Could you have an old James Bond, a young James Bond, a black James Bond, an Indian James Bond, a Chinese James Bond, a mixed race James Bond, a female James Bond, and so on? And to be honest, I feel we have those. If you want a comedy James Bond, you've got several. You've got Johnny English, or you've got, if you're a little older, Austin Powers. There's a Turkish James Bond. He's called Polat Alemdar, and in the Turkish kind of spy series, it's very James Bondish, called Valley of the Wolves. One of the key differentiators from the main series is that the Turkish James Bond has friends. He's got two buddies that go with him, and so you do have more and more family relationships. It's just a part of Turkish films. Western films always say, oh, you've got to combine characters, you've got to simplify, the audience can't keep track of all these people. And I'm like, well, do you have more than two friends in your life? Do you have more than two people? Do you have two parents? Who are all these people who can't keep track of different people? I mean, that just demands better writing and better acting to differentiate out different characters, right? I mean, part of who a character is how you are with different people. Are you exactly the same with your parents to how you are at work? Are you exactly the same with children, small dogs, to how you are with a prospective girlfriend? You all have different facets of your characters, so having a mix of characters in a film or TV show brings out different facets of whoever the main character is. Not that all Turkish films have a necessarily identifiable main character. Anyway, there's a rabbit hole that I could direct you down. There's plenty of Turkish movies currently on Netflix, depending where you are in the world, so have a browse, see how many main characters you can find in just one Turkish movie. Right, now, time for the final ascent. The film by itself. I thought I'd just go through location by location. We have the pre-titles, obviously in Norway, where Safin comes like a creature from a horror film, and I really liked it. I like the fact that French characters speak French. It's fine. It's not very complicated dialogue. It's quite easy to understand. And it gets away from... perhaps this is more influenced by watching classic British movies, but where you differentiate, they're speaking a foreign language because they're putting on a silly accent. So I do like that they do have, French actors speaking French. It's good. We have Safin being shot in a chest where his heart would normally be, and but he gets up. I thought it was a good horror moment. Did seem like a kind of reference to Dr. No, whose heart is on the other side, but they didn't really go into that. Well, I thought it was just an interesting little quirk. And it's beautifully shot, and the Italy sequences are beautifully shot, and there's a lovely bit of local flavour. I really like it. I think they make a lot of use of the locations they go to, Matera, and that's something I always say that I really enjoy. Right, again, from Russia with Love, one of my favourite Bond films, they use the locations. Tomorrow Never Dies. They use the locations. Then we have the song, which I was already well disposed towards, and I just thought the opening graphics, and part of the way just fit into the story. I thought it was great. Then we get into the Jamaica sequences. I'm just belting through the bits I like. Jamaica, again, enjoyed it. I've read the books in his house. I've had that rum, cooked that fish. The red snapper is the name of the fish. You can find it at any good fishmonger, I think. And it was fun, I think, to see Bond just relaxing. And I think that's something the films had lacked for a long time. That was something I enjoyed. That was on my tick list of things I wanted from the next Bond film. Then we have Bond Goes to Cuba. Oddly enough, one of the books in his house, Sailor's Tale, has the story of a guy who sails, I think, from Jamaica to Cuba, perhaps from Florida to Cuba. There's a lot of sailors' tales in it, but I thought it was interesting. One of those very prominent books has a really good story about sailing to Cuba. I do sometimes think that the modern films focus very much on Cuba. If it's Jamaica in the books, quick, scratch it out, change it to Cuba for the American audience, because it never strikes me as a particularly interesting location. And we've had the antagonism from Agent Numi, the knee that works, whatever. And I was kind of wondering, as a Star Wars fan, if we're going to get that Luke Skywalker moment where he's just a sad old dude and he can't really do things and we're going to seem a bit rubbish. But nope, first mission in. Bond's better. He wipes the floor with her and gets the dude he wants, and even has a fun bit with Ana de Armas, which everybody likes. I think it's the Honest Trailers review, where Honest Trailers says Ana de Armas plays a girl where you're like, who's she? And then for the rest of the film you're like, hey, where's she? We were having fun. I think it's a great bit, and almost like a little Bond film in itself. But again, I quite like the fact that, straight out, Bond's just Bond. He hasn't aged, he doesn't have a problem. The next location was London, and I really liked how they used London, how it looked. It looked real, but it also looked cinematic. Obviously, I am British, I live in the UK. If I watch a TV show, pretty sure to see London. That's where a lot of production houses are. And so if I see London in a big movie, to be honest, quite often it looks like a made-for-TV movie. So I thought the way they did it in this film was cinematic. It looked great. I liked Hammersmith Bridge as a location, done a special video on that. I liked how they did the War Office, and again had that bit from The Man with the Golden Gun, the book. They kind of played with that, the Skyfall, they played with some of that here. I really like it. And then of course we have in Norway the emotional scenes, a bit of drama, a long dramatic bit, which is really just there to establish stakes for action. There's plenty of action movies out there, and it's very difficult to care about all these big guys punching each other up unless there's actually some stakes, a bit of human emotion. I mean, it's the fist fight at the end of From Russia with Love, which is many people's favourites, And there's not a huge amount of, fist fights and stunts in that film, but it's because you care about both characters and they're both so well drawn. So for me, okay, they spend a lot of time on the drama, that gets to who they are, and then we have the ending. It was only ever going to end one way. That was apparently said all throughout production. Many people say, but they could have ended it differently. They didn't want to. That was the story. And, well, that's the end of it, really. Verdict: this is an event movie. Now, there are some movies that are a sweet distraction for an hour or two, and we have plenty of Bond films like that. Octopussy, obviously, sweet distraction for an hour or two. You've got some films that are just kind of background as you work out, or you cook, or you do something else. For me, that's Diamonds Are Forever and Die Another Day. I enjoy both films, but especially Diamonds Are Forever. I quite like to have that on the background, and as it's Bond doing Bond stuff for whatever reason. I enjoy that in the background as I'm doing things. Octopussy I sit down and watch. But there are some films that are just event movies. Spartacus, not a happy ending. Lawrence of Arabia, not a happy ending. Lord of the Rings, oddly enough, a bit of a bittersweet, somber ending. And now we've got a Bond film that fits into that third category. We have an event movie. I've only seen Lawrence of Arabia, twice in my life. Spartacus, maybe a few more times than that. Okay, Lord of the Rings quite a lot, but anyway, at least we've got the 3 theatrical editions and the extended editions and all that. Anyway, we now have a Bond film that's an event movie, and we know that James Bond will return. We've gone to quite a few different iterations of James Bond. I'm looking forward to 007th. Won't be coming soon, and that's okay. Give it a rest, get all your ducks in a row, and then go for it. And I feel the next one probably will be a sweet distraction for an hour or two. For now, I'm very happy with the film we got. My name is Thomas. I hope you enjoyed this film review. Let me know if you want some more. If I just stick to the format that I've had for the other 140 odd episodes. Thank you very much for listening. Do check out that YouTube channel for a bit more Bond content. That's youtube.com/British Culture. And of course my Instagram account at Fleming Never Dies. Thank you very much for listening.